We've got a fantastic talk tonight. Just want to say a quick thank you to Adidas 510 for all the support that they give us to put these talks on. Really brilliant. So thanks. And now over to Rebecca.
Yeah, I'm going to do, Emma and I have decided that as we get sort of, you know, more, we decided listening to the sleep talk that we have lots of toxins in our brain by this point in the evening. So we tried to introduce people and we just completely messed things up. So we've agreed with Esther that Esther's going to introduce Esther. But we're so pleased to have her here, somebody who's been involved with WCS in various capacities right from the start 10 years ago. And she'll tell you a little bit more about that. And then we'll head into her talk. So thank you so much, Esther.
Thank you, girls. Great. Yeah, so my name's Esther. I live in the Lake District and I have done for quite a few years now. I started climbing in Liverpool, so I was involved in a big indoor scene there, and then I've predominantly climbed outside since. I love all climbing, so I love indoors. But for me, most of my indoor climbing is about enjoying time with friends, but also benefiting my outdoor climbing. I teach outdoors as well as indoors, a lot of rock climbing, trad sport, bouldering, as well as mountain stuff. So yeah, if any of you have questions about what I do, then feel free to ask at some point or send me personal messages. It's always handy to have advice from people or bounce things off. Great, so hopefully this talk will kind of set you up for getting back to the indoor walls and being able to get outside again. I'm hoping it'll be really relevant. There's obviously lots of you here with all different backgrounds, but hopefully you'll each gain something from it. Feel free to fire questions over as we go along, and I'll keep an eye on the chat. Depending on how we go time-wise, I'll try and answer them. Or if it feels like things might take a bit longer or it's longer answers, then you could just hang on at the end and I can answer them in more detail. I think from my perspective, sometimes online is a little bit tricky with everyone sometimes. And so I just think, like, if you need to go at any point, just do that. You know, I'm not going to worry unless you all go. You know, feel free to have your mics and your videos on or turn them off if that's more appropriate, whatever's best for you. Yeah. So hopefully that'll set you up. So in a second, I'm going to put a little PowerPoint on that I've done, and hopefully that'll help you to see what I'm talking about. If you have got a pen and paper handy, then grab it. If you don't, that's all right. But I'd like you to start off by just jotting down maybe one or two kind of outdoor climbing goals that you have, just so you've got a bit of a focus while you're listening to me. So it could be a specific route, or it could be a specific grade. It could just be a trip you want to go on an area, or it could be, you know, as much as it could just be you want to really enjoy climbing again and relax and enjoy that outdoor climbing. So it doesn't have to be goal focused, route focused, just whatever is appropriate for you. And I'll have a little go at putting my PowerPoint on. Here we go. Share screen. I should be very practiced at this now. Okay, give me a thumbs up if you can see that. Good. Okay, cool. So I did a little quick intro. Now you know who I am. And yeah, I was just saying, write down a couple of your climbing goals just so you've got a bit of a focus. And then just have a little think, you know, those climbing goals, what rock type are they on? And what's the style of climbing? Because that'll have a big impact. Gritstone is very different to limestone, is very different to long alpine routes, is very different to scrambling. So just have a think. Do they involve lots of crimps? Do they involve big moves or small moves? That kind of thing. Okay. I don't know if I might have missed. Here we go, sorry. Sometimes I'm not sure what I've missed out because I'm definitely an outdoor climber. Here we go. Yeah, so indoor walls are amazing and are great for having fun, and by all means go and relax with friends and just have a lot of fun. But there's a few reasons why we can be a lot more clever with our indoor climbing, and we can use that time to really maximize our improvement outdoors. Okay, and these are a couple of reasons I've kind of come up with. So indoor climbing walls have evolved, haven't they? If you've climbed for any length of time, you'll have seen that change, and you'll have seen a change from quite controlled indoor climbing and a lot of crimps to much more large, dynamic and coordinated movements. And actually, if you think about bouldering and route climbing indoors, you might notice that the footholds are often very spaced as well. Okay, and that's not a bad thing. That's not wrong. And training on that kind of stuff, it's still really good for your climbing. You know, it's good for your coordination. It's good for your balance. It's good for your strength. But it's actually not always as transferable to your outdoor climbing. Okay, if you're a route climber or even a boulder outside, actually it's not, if you think about the style of moves you're doing, it's not always quite as applicable. Okay, so that's why I think we can just be a little bit more clever. So if it's not that similar to outdoor climbing, well, what are the demands of outdoor climbing? I've made a little list. You can take little screenshots of this, or we'll send you the PowerPoint. And I won't go into them all in detail, but these are some of the ideas that I've kind of come up with. Okay, one of the massive things for outdoor climbing is the decision making you have to make. There's millions of different footholds, isn't there, on routes, but also on boulders. There's so many different options and choices, and if it takes you a long old time to work out what works for you and play around with all those different moves, you're then tired, or you're powered out, or you've got a flapper or a split tip already. So that's one of the big things outside, is that there's so many options. And if you think about boulders and routes, they change in angle and style throughout that route or boulder a heck of a lot. Whereas actually indoors, we're often on uniform angles, aren't we? So they're just a few of my thoughts there. And then my last thought is that, yeah, sometimes when we go indoor climbing, we just do the same thing. I don't know about you, but like, we do a bit of a warm up. We maybe try something harder. Maybe we have a cup of tea. Maybe we do a bit of stretching and go home or something. And sometimes we do just do the same old thing. And by all means, go and have fun and chat to your mates. But actually, we can be a little bit more focused sometimes and get a bit more out of our sessions. So just as you're thinking about your climbing, and as you're thinking about this presentation, just have an awareness of the difference between practice and performance. All right, so sometimes we climb, we get very het up on like, this is the grade I want to do, and if we don't get to the top of some routes, we go home feeling crap. Or if we don't climb the same grade indoors that we think we're capable of, then we feel crap about ourselves. Okay, but what I want to emphasize is that the performance is very much the icing on the cake. It's the tip of the iceberg. Yeah, and it's the same with your competition climbers and right through to beginners. You know, the practice is the bulk of that cake. And actually, sometimes we need to let go of that performance and just go and think, you know what, I'm going to practice what I'm not very good at, and I'm going to enjoy it, and I'm going to own the small gains. Okay, so if you finish an indoor session, and if you can write down a whole list of everything you've learned or developed in that session, regardless of whether you got to the top or not, or climbed your grade, if you can come up with a big list of stuff you've practiced and developed, then that's ace, and you should totally own that as success, I would say. Yeah, and this was just another thought. You know, there's cultures in climbing walls and there's trends. Okay, and don't be afraid to do things differently. So there's definitely a culture and a trend now of physical training. Okay, and that's ace, by all means, do physical training. But there's, you know, 5-10 years ago, you'd have never seen people in a climbing wall doing core workouts or on the Lattice app or doing repeaters on something. You just wouldn't have seen it. Okay, and now that's the trend. So if you know what you want to improve at and how you want to do it, then just do it. Don't worry about what other people think. And you might find they look at you and they want to get involved and they're quite inspired. And yeah, make it fun. You know, climbing is about being creative and experimenting and exploring stuff and experimenting with our bodies. So do that and don't worry about anything else. Cool. So I'm just going to highlight some of the things I'm going to talk about. And I've come up with 5 recommendations. There's obviously loads of things, but these are kind of the 5 areas that I wanted to mention today. Okay, and I'll go into them in a little bit more depth. You might find that lots of things apply to you, or it might just be something little. At the end of each section, if it helps you to write things down, then maybe write down one thing that you want to remember after each section that I talk about, if that helps you. So first of all, I'm going to chat about small footholds. Okay, and I really want to emphasize using small footholds. Okay, so you can see on these pictures, and if you think to your outdoor climbing and your indoor climbing, compare the sizes of footholds that we use. Okay, they're dramatically different. Even on hard climbs indoors, they're often quite chunky footholds, just because that's a little bit easier to set and it works. So think about your outdoor climbs, the places that you're going to be going. Are you using little tiny polished limestone nubbins that you can see everyone's black rubber is polished up? Or is it gritstone smears? Or little slopey rails? You know, sometimes they're footholds that you can't even see unless there's a little bit of chalk on. And it can be really disconcerting sometimes when we're not used to it. So have you ever used any of these phrases? I know I have. So I know that plenty of times we just think there's no way I can use that. There's no possibility. Or we've got there and we've thought there were literally no footholds. And this is one for us girls a lot of the time. Sometimes we decide to get our feet above our head, you know, just ridiculously high rather than use that crappy foothold. And that's really common. And I'm not saying it's bad to get high feet, but sometimes it's avoiding little footholds. So yeah, so do these phrases ring bells to you? Are you a chronic high stepper? And what I mean by that is, it's not bad to do high steps. There's certainly times when just getting your foot really high and rocking over and getting your hips over your feet is the way to do something, and is really much quicker, much more efficient. But if all of your climbing involves really high feet every single time, it might be that you're avoiding using those smaller footholds. And it might be that you're making things a lot more strenuous than they need to be. Yeah, so as you get more confident and more capable on small footholds, you'll be able to do lots of little steps, and you'll find actually you can take the weight off your arms a bit easier. So yeah, small outdoor footholds, basically you have to be more precise. You have to have much more body tension. When I've been climbing outdoors a lot, I find my legs are sore, like my inner thighs and my hamstrings and my calves sometimes, because actually we've been using a lot more tension in our lower body, more nuance, getting used to putting pressure in just the right amount and just the right direction. And crucially, I think confidence and experience on those footholds. So yeah, these are just some of the benefits I would say for climbing on, practicing on smaller poor footholds. So if you're confident and more relaxed, then you're going to climb better. You're not going to hesitate so much. You're not going to try every single possible alternative sequence before you go back to that original one that you were going to try. You'll probably do less high steps, and so you'll minimize those strenuous moves a bit more. And you'll develop much more full body tension and precision. So footholds, when we use our feet, it's not just a case of standing on footholds. It's a case of pressing, pulling, clawing, pushing, all these kind of weird ways of using our feet. So these are, I've got some ways of using small footholds, because it's quite easy to just tell you, you should use small footholds, okay? But in an indoor wall, how can you actually do that in a really good way? And it'll be different for all of you, depending on your wall, maybe. So being a little bit creative, okay? You don't have to stick to the roots. Sorry to break it to you, but like, you know, like I said at the beginning, climbing is about being creative and experimenting. You don't actually have to stick to the routes that they've designed. Okay, so you can decide to use loads of screw-ons if the screw-ons at your wall, or if you've got one of those old school walls with some of the resin features and features embedded to the rock, you can use them too, for 1 foot or for both feet, whatever works for you. If you own a home wall or have access to like a home training facility, put those small footholds on, okay, or turn your larger ones upside down. For sure, have a go with good footholds first, but whatever problems or circuits you're trying, you could work them first and then make the footholds worse. And it'd be really interesting to see how different it is. You could try full routes or problems with 1 foot smearing while the other is on a foothold. Or this is one of my favorites, kind of trying hands off or palms only challenges. So that could be on a corner or a slab or something 3D. But as soon as we eliminate something, as soon as we eliminate our hands, we have to weight our feet really well. And we have to trust our feet more. So it can be really good for building up your confidence. Just standing on a slab and just trying to take our hands off, just standing on a poor hold and just experimenting with just taking our hands off slowly can be really good. And just some thoughts to consider as you're trying to get better with small footholds. It depends on you, but sometimes when I've said to people, try scrunching your toes up, like consciously scrunching your toes up, then it pinpoints the pressure onto the end of your toes. It does the job of wearing tighter shoes. Or if you know that you're in fairly baggy shoes, just have a little go with tighter shoes, and it just basically pinpoints all that pressure right on one spot, which enables you to climb on smaller footholds, basically. And yeah, like I said before, just experimenting with all these different ways of using your feet. Great. So that's small footholds. If you want to write down something that stood out for you, then go for it. I can't actually see if there's anyone's asked any questions. For some reason, my mouse doesn't appear. But if there's any specific questions, maybe someone can just tell me.
Yeah, I'll read them out for you, Esther.
Is there a few? Oh, I can't hear you.
None at the moment.
Okay, we're good. Great. I don't know why my mouse is gone, but I can move on in the presentation. So that's all that matters. Okay, so next one. Okay, rainbow footholds. And is it really cheating? It kind of varies, but like I was reiterating before, it's our personal climbing at a wall, isn't it? And if you're using rainbow footholds for a specific reason, then go do that. Don't listen to what anyone else says. You know, like if you're wanting to claim a grade, for sure, you've got to climb on those certain footholds or on that colour. Or if you want to climb the hardest route you can. Yeah, rainbow footholds would be seen as cheating. But if the point of your session is to improve your outdoor climbing, or you're trying to work on specific techniques, then rainbow holds are absolutely okay. Yeah, and are really quite good ways of training your outdoor climbing. So the benefits of using rainbow footholds. Like I mentioned before, one of the biggest things for outdoor climbing is the decision making, is all those millions of choices and faffing about with trying lots of different things and not knowing really what works for you. Indoors, we have much less choices because there's far less holds. So actually, if you decide that you're going to climb whatever grade with, you know, blues for handholds, but anything for feet, you're making yourself have to make lots of decisions the whole time. And you're having to decide what footholds work for you, what body position will work for you. And it's then really good for transferring that to outdoor decision making. You'll basically improve at choosing the best position footholds for you. And I think this is crucial for the fact that we're all very different. We're all built differently. Some of us are really small, some are really tall, some Some of us are better at certain moves than others. So by choosing the best footholds for you in your size or your climbing style means that you get really good at choosing the most efficient way of moving for you personally, which is what you've got to do outside. The beauty of kind of outdoor climbing is that we all climb things very differently because we've got those choices. So it's kind of cool to work on that indoors. So this is something, I don't know, you'll all have different thoughts on this, and maybe you've not thought about it before. But I'd encourage you, maybe when you go to a wall or you go outdoors, start to notice whether people are doing moves with 1 foot on the wall or 2 feet on the wall. And just notice from, you know, elite climbers through to beginners, are they putting 1 foot on and going for the move? Or are they putting 2 feet on and going for the move? Okay. And again, like, there's no huge right or wrong, but climbing, doing moves with 2 feet on the wall can really take weight off your arms. And if you look at most route climbers, particularly good route climbers, they'll do as many moves as they can with 2 feet on the wall. Okay. Now I'm going to give you the option of standing up. You don't have to, but if you want to try this, it might help you to realize what I'm trying to explain. Okay, so I'll demo, and if you're bored of sitting in front of a TV and you want to stand up, go for it. And if you don't, you can just watch. But essentially, what I'd like you to do is you can stand on 1 foot, maybe just on your toe, and move your hands about, and then have a think about how all the muscles that you're using. Okay, so if I was to stand 1 foot on, 1 toe on the floor, heel off, I'm having to balance. Okay, and then if I'm going for moves and I'm climbing, I'm having to use loads of stabilizing muscles to balance. Okay, and on the rock, that means I'm pulling with my arms. Okay, if I stand with 2 toes on the floor, okay, nice and wide, 2 toes on the floor, and I move my hands around like I'm doing lots of different climbing moves, I can stay much more stable. Okay, I'm not having to use all those stabilizing muscles. So when you transfer that onto rock, if I do moves with 2 feet on, I'm not having to tense my shoulders nearly so much. So it's a really good way of not having to be stronger. So we'll move on. So how can you practice this? How can you practice with rainbow footholds? Like I mentioned, handholds on a specific colour, anything for feet. Okay, and your goal, regardless of the grade, your goal is to try and make that route or boulder as easy as you possibly can. Okay, you might find at first that you slow down, okay, because there's loads more options. But as you repeat and practice, you'll start getting a little bit more slick, a little bit more fluid, and that's what you want for outdoor climbing. And yeah, like I said, if you want, you can set yourself the challenge of thinking, right, I'm going to try and keep 2 feet on the wall for every hand move. 2 feet on the wall, every hand move. So that involves moving 2 feet up and then going for the hand move. And again, like, I'm not saying that's the golden rule. You know, there'll certainly be times when you just need to just get 1 foot on and just go for the move, but save that for those powerful moves. Okay.
There's a couple of questions, Esther, if you want me to read them out.
Go for it.
To do with footholds as well, so I didn't want you to move on to the next bit. I've always loved climbing indoors, but I've always been weak outdoors. I just don't seem to be able to see obvious places to put my feet. Is there any tips you could give on developing spotting footholds outdoors, please?
Oh, yeah, okay. So certainly, like I said, if you're indoors, rainbow feet, that would be good, because you're suddenly, instead of looking at one thing, you're looking at a much bigger area and picking what was best for you. In terms of when you're actually outdoors, getting better at spotting feet, there's a few different ways. So climbing outdoors, it will naturally happen, but in terms of speeding that up, sometimes, depends on the situation, but sometimes I tell people, they're stood on the wall, and I tell people to look maybe around their knee on the rock, okay? Because sometimes when we look at everything, we get a bit panicked and we're like, I don't know whether to put my foot there, and it's all just a bit overwhelming. Whereas if you zoom in, sometimes that can help, okay? Not always, because sometimes it's good to have wide feet, but particularly if you're on like a vertical or kind of slabby thing, looking in that kind of circle around your knee, where the height of your knees, that's a really good place to then move your foot up to. Another good thing, which I use for roots and for tactics for trad a lot as well, is when I'm on a rest position, like a good foot ledge, for example, or a good handhold, then I look at what footholds are coming up. And sometimes I get a little dab of chalk and I just dab like maybe 4 little footholds I can see coming up. And then when I move up to them, I can look down, I'm like, oh, there's my 2 options. And I find that really helps, rather than getting up there, being really gripped, and be like, I can't see the feet, I can't see the feet. So that can really help. And it also, for me, putting that little bit of chalk on kind of tells me that it is a foothold. Like if it's really tiny, if I put a bit of chalk on it, my brain goes, oh yeah, it must be fine. I must be able to use that. And that can really help.
Cool. So question number 2, what do you mean by choosing a foothold according to our size? This is a new concept for me, because I always follow the route indoors and outdoors, like small steps. I like small steps.
Okay.
And outdoors, I like small steps. Yeah, I think the main thing is just explain a bit more about not following the route.
Yeah, and climbing according to your size.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, climbing according to your size and choosing different footholds. So I mean, my understanding of what you were just saying, Esther, is that if you're small and you want to do a particular problem at the wall, you can use any feet you want. You don't have to stick to the colour, especially if it means you get to climb those moves. And then you can work up to using just the footholds from that colour. You know, you don't have to stick to the colours, especially if it means you can access smaller holds for your hands.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so I think sometimes a good way of progressing indoors can be just that. So it can be trying some problems with rainbow feet and then making it harder for yourself by just sticking to the coloured feet. So that can be a good way of progressing. But by climbing kind of according to your size, what I mean is, like, we're all very different in our build and we're all very different in our strengths. And if every single one of us tries to climb exactly the same way, you know, it doesn't work. If you look at any climber, they'll climb a certain problem outdoors or a certain route just differently. Okay, so by using rainbow footholds indoors, you get really good at just kind of automatically putting your feet where it is best for you. And then you do moves in a way that are more efficient for you. So that then when you go outdoors, it's the same as well. Don't know if that specifically answer the question, but that person can always ask a few more things at the end. I don't mind.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Is that all right? Okay. I think we're okay for that. Okay. My next thought is pacing. Okay. And when I talk about pacing, I kind of mean the different speeds you climb at. Okay. So I want you to have a little think just now about what is your kind of default climbing pace. Yeah. So you might be the kind of climber that's like ultra slow and steady, just like one little bit at a time, have a little think, have a little chalk, another little bit at a time. Or it might be that you're the kind of climber that's like all out for 2 moves. but then might get tired very fast, or you might be quite good at kind of turning on that maximum effort and that fight, particularly if you're a boulderer, you're used to trying 100%. Or it might be, you know, is your default climbing quite smooth and steady? Yeah. So a lot of us, we get stuck at a certain pace, and it's just the way we've climbed for years and years and years. Okay, I'm predominantly, I do love bouldering, but I'm predominantly a route climber, or have been. And so I climb very fluid and smooth, but I really struggle to kind of go a bit faster when I need to. You know, I've got this default pace. But rock demands us to be adaptable. Okay, so what's your normal pace? So yeah, outdoor climbs vary so much. Sometimes they have real bulges where you just need to fight to get over them, and then you can recover. They have corners, they have little slabs and technical sections. They're really varied, all within even one boulder problem or one route. Okay. So yeah, I would say that we need to be able to adapt, have that faster fighting pace through the steep sections, have that slow, controlled pace for slabs, and that fluid movement for sustained stuff. This was a phrase I heard a little while ago that really resonated, I think, with me. Adaptability is the greatest ability. Okay, so being able to adapt to anything that's thrown at you. And that's often the best climbers. And when you look at our elite climbers, or anyone that's climbed it a long time, they can change their style depending on the demands. Okay, so here's a few of the benefits. So I want you to think about your pace a little bit like a car. Okay, if you had a car that could only go in second gear, might not be that useful. It might just be a little bit frustrating to drive. Okay, so it's quite nice to just have a few different gears in your climbing repertoire. Okay, your body and mind are familiar with a certain pace. Okay, and if you don't practice other paces, when you're in a stressful situation, you'll revert to default. You'll revert to your familiar, normal way. Okay, so if you practice different paces when you are relaxed and when you're not stressed, it'll be much, much easier to adapt when you are kind of slightly out of your comfort zone. So how do we actually practice climbing at different paces? And I'm not telling you, you know, we're not speed climbing unless you want to get into speed climbing. It doesn't need to be that, but there's definitely ways of practicing. So just practicing switching between 3 gears. Okay, think of your first gear as kind of really slow, controlled, ultra precise, a lot of body tension and slow movements. Third gear, that would be more like flowing and fluid. Okay, and you can practice this by never stopping, but also never rushing. Okay, so I'm not telling you need to climb fast for this, but if you climbed a route or boulder and just told yourself, right, I am never going to stop my movement, never going to stop my movement. You don't have to fly up the wall, but you need to not stop. And that can be quite good for just getting you in the zone, in the flow. Really good for kind of sustained, slightly pumpy climbing. And 5th gear is your fighting pace. Okay, that's your all out. You've got to get through these few moves. You've got to get over that bulge. Bit more snatchy, bit more committing. So you could climb a route or a circuit where you consciously change paces. Okay, you could get a friend to just shout at you when they want you to change. You could pick a change in angle on a route or circuit, or you could pick some jugs or a resting point for you to change and just get familiar with that change. Or just practice climbing full routes or circuits at a pace which is unfamiliar to you. All of these things I'm asking of you, it's good to do them just a little bit each session. You don't have to hammer the whole session, but a little bit each session until it becomes familiar. If you just try it once, then you might not see a huge amount of change. I think, yes, this was my last point, was just pay attention to your breathing if you can sometimes. If you suddenly switch on that fighting pace, that 5th gear, pay attention to if you're actually breathing. And if you're not, maybe practice breathing while you're moving a little bit. Sometimes we stop breathing when we're trying really hard. Or we have really shallow, like chest breaths up here, like really stressful chest breaths. So yeah, paying attention and playing around with that is a really good idea. Any questions immediately about this? Maybe we're all right.
Yeah, there's none popping up.
Okay, that's fine. Let's move on. What have we got? Okay, rests. This should apply to route climbers, but also boulderers. Okay, I know you're probably not going to be getting like needing to get hands off rests on boulderers, but utilizing resting positions, so your knee bars, your heel hooks, your toe scums, anything just to make things a little bit easier for yourself will be useful for boulderers for sure as well. So the benefits of practicing using rests and finding rests. People that have climbed outdoors a lot are really good at finding restful positions, like weird and wonderful places, knee bars and wide feet and all sorts of things, which you don't always have as much indoors or as much need for. So it just gets you better at spotting. Like the person earlier was saying, oh, I can't see the footholds. It's the same with rests. You know, you don't see the rests maybe, or you don't see those potentials. So getting yourself good at spotting resting opportunities is a really good way of making moves easier for when you go outdoors. You'll see opportunities for knee bars, heel hooks and toe hooks, wide feet, palming. And how would we practice this? Okay, so one thing you can just do is when you go to the route or boulder wall, just how many hands off rests can you find on that route? Okay, and that can be a pretty good challenge between friends. And you might think, oh yeah, I could find 2. Like there's no more than that, surely. And then you'll ask a friend that's maybe a bit more experienced or whatever, and realize there's actually 10 rests because they're pretty good at heel hooks or they've done a few knee bars before. So that can be like a really good challenge, I think, just how many hands off rests can you find? Can you find a hands off knee bar, heel hook, slab, toe hook? If anyone hasn't found a hands off knee bar before, I challenge you next time you go to a wall, because I mean, it's really satisfying for one. But if you ever want to do some kind of 3D sport climbing, places like Kalimnos or a bit more bouldering, you know, getting good at practicing with those knee bars can really, you know, take the weight off your arms so much. Yeah, so actually practicing resting, okay? So maybe choosing some specific shakeout points on your route and actually practice finding a really restful position and actually recovering on the wall. Okay, really important for route climbers, really. So you want to be able to get to a rest and you want to actually be able to shake out, feel your arms recover. You want to actually feel your heart rate go down and your breathing get calmer. You want to be doing belly breaths rather than these really stressful chest breaths. And actually, the more you practice that, the more you'll be able to put it into place on a route that's on your limit. So here we go. So it might be that you've got a great rest routine and that's fine for you. But if you don't think you have, coming up with a little resting routine can really work. Okay, if you're a route climber particularly. So it might be that you might shake out a certain number of times, or you might get to that resting position and you might consciously think about relaxing your jaw and then relaxing your neck and then relaxing your shoulders then relaxing your calves, and then bringing your heart rate down. And once you start practicing those things, you might notice where you're most tense. Yeah, you might notice that actually your calves always stay really, really tense. So you might notice that your shoulders are always up here when you're shaking out because you're still like not very relaxed. So going, top to toe, resting one bit at a time, and just really, really recovering can be pretty good. Oh, is there any questions about that?
Yeah, there is. We've got a few questions on this topic, but just before we do, I missed someone's hand up for the last section. So Rosa, is that how you say it, Rosa?
Yeah, Rosa, thanks. Sorry, it's late. Yeah, so about pacing, I thought that was really interesting because I always think I climb really slowly and I'm always really embarrassed because other people are like really flowy and good at it, and then you just get told to just climb lots and lots and it'll come. And yeah, about the fifth gear, like I sometimes do that when I get worried and I don't want to fall and I just go for it. But yeah, I sort of worry that if I try going too quickly that all my technique just goes completely up the left and I'm just stomping about and it's really horrible. I don't know, do you think you should just do it anyway, or go as fast as you can, keeping technique as well as possible?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And I think, for those of us that are more kind of smooth or steadier climbers, then for sure we'll feel like we're just climbing really badly, but I definitely think practice it. It's actually a really, it's actually a really high skill level and a really hard skill to be able to climb, really snatch for holds and really climb at your limit whilst also climbing with good technique. That's one of the traits of your elite climbers that we see, is that they manage to climb in really stressful situations and at their absolute limit, and when they're so pumped and when they're so tired, and still have really good technique. And the only reason is because they practiced. They're not born like that. So it'd be the same for us. So practicing just maybe half a boulder problem or whole boulder problem or sections or whatever, where you're like, right, I'm just going to go. And you'll find that at first, you might be really uncoordinated, but you'll practice it little by little and you'll get a little bit more coordinated. Or what will happen is you might be a bit scrappy, your feet might come off, but you'll get good at staying on anyway. Okay. Sometimes when we're quite controlled climbers, when we start to be a bit snatchy or our feet cut loose or whatever, sometimes our body just gives up because we just think we're off, or we think, our mind kind of screws us over a little bit. Whereas if you get used to being like, oh, my toe pinged off that, but it's straight back on, or I almost missed that hold, but I grabbed it again, or whatever, get that familiarity in your head of like, okay, it wasn't perfect, but I'm still fighting. Does that help? Maybe.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. That was a really good answer to that. I love that. We've got a few questions about the rests.
Yes.
What do you mean by toe scum?
Oh, well, anything that uses the top of your toe. Okay, so you've got full-on toe hooks, where this is the hold and you're really, really pulling on your toe. But you can do all sorts of things with your toes just to get a little bit of pull. So it might not be a full-on toe hook. It might just be there's a 2-foot or a corner and you're just putting your toe around that just the tiniest bit and it's pulling your hips in. Just anything and everything to try and effectively pull your hips in or stop your body from coming away from the wall.
Cool. Right, another question from Lisa. Someone's just written, toe scums are my fave thing. That sounds so fun. Brilliant. So Lisa, how long should you rest for? I've been told I don't rest long enough, but I worry about tiring out the other arm if I hadn't rested for so long. No.
Yeah.
you get that? I read that really badly. Sorry.
No, I think I do. Like, how long do you rest for, and how do you know?
Yeah, and how is it going to tire out the other arm?
Yeah, and I think it's a hard question that I've wondered this myself often. I'm like, but when should I move again? And often, like, it varies depending on how pumped I am, how good the rest is, blah, blah, blah. And sometimes it depends on how stressed we are as well. And sometimes I'll rest longer because I don't want to move because I'm on a really good hold. I just don't want to leave it, you know? So for sure, having maybe a cup, 2 or 3 things in your head that you're going to tick off to then know you're going to move on again. Okay, so one of the major things I would say is your breathing's relaxed. If your breathing has got longer, more calm breaths, that also means your heart rate's come down. Okay, and if you can tell that in your body, then you're potentially ready to climb again. Whereas if your breathing's still really shallow and like definitely not ready to climb again. Okay, so breathing is one thing. The next thing is how pumped your arms are, or how your body is feeling. Okay, so sometimes I'll shake out really quickly if it's quite a crap rest, so we're like, whoa, quick. And sometimes I can shake out for ages because it's a really good hold, and then the other arm. But essentially, I'd like to be able to rest and feel my forearms feeling less sore, less pumped. Okay, and when I start to feel that they're less sore and less pumped and less kind of rock solid, that's another cue in my head to move on. Okay, and another cue for me to move on is that I know what I'm doing next. Okay, as weird as that sounds, I'll play through the next few moves in my head, or I'll put little chalk dabs on the footholds, or I'll spot the footholds coming up, or I'll look up and say, right, that's my next rest that I'm getting to. Okay, so that's hopefully 3 things: breathing, arms, and having a plan for what's next. There's different ways of doing it. I've had some friends that, like, if you know you rest maybe longer than you should, but more because you're a little bit nervous or a little bit stressed, sometimes I've got my belay to like time 5 minutes and tell me when that 5 minutes is up, something like that, just to help you move on. Or sometimes if I'm red pointing a route, occasionally I've played around with saying, right, I'm going to shake out 4 times on each arm, and then I'm going to move on. And that helps me to be a bit more decisive.
Perfect. Thank you. That's all of them for now, I think.
Great. Okay. What have we got next? Specificity. So it sounds like it's quite logical, when we think about it. Matching the climbing style and the wall angle as much as possible to your outdoor climbing. For sure, climbing a variety is good. Okay, but if most of your outdoor climbing is going to be on vertical and slabs, then there's not much point spending all your time in the bouldering cave, and vice versa. Okay, so just trying to make things as specific as possible. Okay, and that's because our bodies get really good at what we practice the most. And again, like, it sounds logical, but sometimes we forget this. Okay, if we want to get good at steep climbing, we need to climb on steep stuff. If we want to get good at moving again with our hands, if we want to get good at heel hooks, we need to practice heel hooks. So matching that. So going back to your goals, what do your outdoor climbs consist of mostly? Are they slopers? Are they crimps? Is it steep? Is there a lot of 3D in corners? And how can you use whatever indoor facility you have to get this practice in? You could just go to your boulder wall or your route wall, and you could just try everything with slopers in it. Forget about the grade and just look around you and think, right, every sloper, every route with sloper in, or boulder point with sloper in, I'm just going to try regardless. Or I'm just going to pick loads of crimps. Or I'm going to invent my own problem. I'm going to find all the pinches, because I'm rubbish at pinching. I'm going to find all the pinches in the wall. I'm going to make myself some pinch problems. Or if you're bad, do you use your thumbs? if you think that actually your outdoor climbs would benefit from getting your thumbs on, and you notice that you don't, then try and climb as many routes or boulders, just getting your thumbs on every hold. So yeah, inventing your own, seeking out those boulders or routes. Yeah, and thinking what you need to get good at. Is it the big moves that you struggle with? If that's the case, then you could just eliminate holds. You could pick some easy routes or easy boulders and just take a hold out and try it, and then take another hold out and try it. To get good at things, or particularly to get good at stuff that we struggle with, it's really good to get loads and loads of successes, even if that's at a low level of difficulty. So dynamic moves, for example, if we just hammer a really, really hard dyno over and over again at the wall, we will improve, but actually we'd improve better if we did tons of really easy dynos, but just tons of them. Because every time you succeed in something, you're reiterating to your brain and to your body that you can do that, and that works, and that the movement works. And so, yeah, having loads and loads of successes is a really good way of doing it. So yeah, these are just the kind of things I was talking about. A few ideas. Yeah, spending a good proportion of your indoor climbing time on wall angles that are similar to your goals. So that's that. Any questions before we kind of sum up a little bit?
Nothing in the chat at the moment.
That is okay. We'll move on, and people can just dip in if you want, if something comes up. Okay, so just a few of my kind of thoughts in terms of incorporating things. Sometimes we get a bit excited and we have all these new ideas and things we want to get better at. And it's the same with physical training as well. We're bombarded online now. There's so many resources, there's so many ideas, there's so many webinars, there's so many useful advice that we go away and we're like, right, I want to incorporate these 20 new things into each week. And often it doesn't work that well. So, maybe have all these ideas and anything from this session, but just pick one or two things, okay? One or two things, and incorporate them and practice them regularly, and you'll see much more improvement. And practice them until you start to see improvement. Once you start to see improvement, you feel really motivated then. It's the same with physical training. When I start to see that I'm improving at physical training, I'm really motivated. Whereas if I don't, I maybe give it one or two sessions and then struggle to move on to the next idea. So yeah, one or two things. And just like physical training, short, regular practice is much better than just having one mega session. Yeah, one mega upper body session, 3-hour thing where you've got DOMs for the next week, actually isn't going to give you as much benefit as regular, consistent, but maybe smaller bouts of training. And then consider what works for you. Some of you guys might have like really stressful days at work and you're kind of mentally tired. Practicing new things, practicing techniques, practicing things we're not good at actually takes quite a lot of mental energy. Okay, so you might find you go to the climbing wall and you just need to deload and you need to chat to your mates and just not use your brain at all. Okay, and then other sessions you might feel like, actually, yeah, I can really focus on something. So plan what works for you and give yourself that kind of relaxed, easy climbing, like fun climbing sessions when you need them. Yeah, and then other times practice. And yeah, I would recommend incorporating some of these things maybe into warm-ups in the first half of your session. The entire session can sometimes feel a little bit mentally draining. It might work totally fine for you if you've got loads of energy, but often if you just think, right, every warm-up, because warm-ups are boring, let's be honest. I can never be asked what, incorporate some of these things into your warm-ups or those first routes in your session on really easy routes that aren't going to physically tax you, and then do whatever you want for the next half of the session, or push your routes or something like that. And yeah, like I said before, don't be afraid of doing things differently. Fall off. Ignore the ego that we sometimes have when we're used to getting to tops of 60s or whatever, and encourage your friends to practice with you. You know, it might be a lot of these things are maybe more fun and more motivating if there's a couple of you doing it. And sometimes we need to be the first one to do it rather than waiting for someone else to have a go. Don't be afraid to just put yourself out there, suggest some things. And yeah, any final questions? I definitely think I often go to these things, I think, yeah, that's all in my head. That's definitely all in my head. And then the next day I can remember like 2 things. So I would encourage you to write a few things down if you want to, or I can send this PowerPoint out to people. And yeah, sometimes with like making changes or putting things in motion, we have big plans, don't we? Which is great, have the big goals. But sometimes we don't always do them, and it's the same with like New Year's resolutions and everything, isn't it? So I would encourage you to think of one tiny thing that you will actually do in the next 24 hours in response to this. Okay, it could be as simple as writing a few notes down tomorrow when you slept. It might be talking to your climbing partner and actually working out when you go and climbing, or just anything little tiny, but something that you will definitely action, because it for sure, you know, it's the first steps that sometimes we slack on. Oh, I think that's it. Does anyone want to ask anything else?
Amazing, thanks Esther. We've got some questions, and I think just that last point on the previous slide, really important. I'm going to take away your share so we can see you. But that point about not being afraid to be the person who looks different, because I think some climbing walls are quite difficult environments for women sometimes, or just being the person who stands out anyway. So having that confidence just to get on with your own thing is fantastic. We've got some questions if you're happy to take those.
Yes, and I can see them now actually.
Okay, brilliant. So starting with dealing with heights, and is that outdoors being a very different game of exposure in this, not feeling the same as indoors. Any tips for practicing that indoors for outdoors?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to look at where that question was. It how to deal with heights?
Yeah.
In terms of the exposure outdoors compared to indoors?
Yeah.
It's a pretty big topic because climbing is so psychological, and I would say that there are different solutions for everyone. And I don't mean that as a cop-out answer, but I think for sure having a think about you personally and how to approach things for you personally works, rather than just a generic one-size-fits-all thing. So first of all, I would say if height and exposure outdoors is something that kind of worries you or stresses you out on routes, then maybe write that down, but then try and write down a little bit more detail to actually unpick a little bit about what it is. Okay, is it the unknown? Yeah, is it that actually you don't know what's coming up and that's what freaks you out? Or is it the distance between the bolts is further? Or is it actually a fear of hurting yourself? You know, there's lots of different reasons why we might get a bit scared with heights. And in terms of building up to that, firstly, I would say that sometimes if we're scared of something, we kind of decide that that's just us, and we fully own that, and we think, well, I'm really scared of that, and it becomes very much something that we think about ourselves a lot. Okay, I'd say anything you're scared about or find intimidating or stressful, you can absolutely get to the point where it's not nearly so bad. So having that belief, that fundamental belief that, yeah, I can totally get to that point, I think is quite important, like foundation to have. And then I would encourage you to build it up slowly, would be one thing. So little by little, whether that's seconding routes, whether it's small routes and then slightly bigger routes, just little by little, rather than just chucking yourself in there. And then the second thing I would do is potentially every time you go on an outdoor route, regardless of what experience it's been like for you, then at the end of that day, make a list of everything you have done well at, or improved, or developed, or learnt. Yeah. And I can almost guarantee you that even if you've had, you know, felt like you had a meltdown on that route, or felt like, oh, you were really scared, you'll still be able to write down probably like 10 things that you felt like you did well at, whether that's, oh, I committed above those few bolts, or I felt a little bit more confident last week. Just basically owning all those things that we did well at, because our brains really focus in on the things we don't do well at, and we kind of own that. And we have to really reiterate to our brains that actually there were loads of things which we did well at, and start to own that. And little by little, hopefully you'll see an improvement.
Amazing. So we're at sort of 8:29, if that helps you in the chat at the moment. So Rosie asking, anything you can do to prepare your skin for outdoor climbing? Lockdown fingers, how are they going to deal with a weekend on grit?
That's a good question. Prepare your skin for outdoor climbing. Yeah, gosh. I mean, it's going to be sore. Yeah, something I've been doing a lot more bouldering this winter, you know, and like I've really learned that there's a whole skincare thing out, you know. I've not had all these flappers and cuts before at all compared to what I've had this winter, so it's been a bit of a steep learning curve for me. But one of the big things I learned this winter was to tape before. You know, if you're bouldering and there's a really sharp hold on there and you can see your skin's already fraying, tape before. Because quite a few times this winter I've been like, oh, that's a really sharp hold, oh, my skin's a bit sore, I'll just go for that move anyway, and then I've got the flappers, and then it's a total pain. So preempt stuff. Preparing your skin, I would say we've all got a different skin, you know. Some people's is really tough, and some people's is a bit more sweaty and whatever. You want your skin to be kind of tough but also soft. If you end up with like a kind of hard, like glassy exterior, then it rips off really quickly. So using Climb On, or if you've got little calluses or little shiny bits or tough bits, just sanding them down just a touch will work really well. But in terms of preparing, if you haven't been outdoors for a long time and you know you're gonna go outdoors for a bit, even as simple as playing around on some, you know, a brick wall outside your house, or basically anything just to toughen just a little bit will give you that edge for sure. But for all of us, when we get back into rock climbing after a while, like there is going to be, yeah, our skin's not going to be used to it.
Worth bearing in mind for indoor walls as well, because a lot of them have bought whole new hold sets because they were bored during lockdown. So that damage could be done indoors too. Are you, Esther, are you on the chat now?
Yes, yeah.
Gemma.
Okay, so what is your view on full crimping on problems? I try and avoid it as much as possible when I'm indoors to try and avoid injury, but I wonder if it could be a good idea to incorporate full crimps into sessions too. Yeah, you know, a little bit like I said before, adaptability is the greatest ability, and having a variety of grips is really important. Yeah, so yeah, a variety of grips indoors is going to be really applicable to outdoors, because outdoors it's so dependent, you know. Sometimes you might open, sometimes you might get your thumb on and close crimp, and just being familiar and good with all these different styles is a really good idea. For sure, full crimping puts a little bit more strain on our joints, so I'd just say with that is like being more careful to warm up. You can get away with being a little bit colder if you drag, but if you're going to start full crimping, just make sure your fingers are really, really warm up. So yeah, I would definitely full crimp indoors, and I would probably encourage you to do maybe what you're least familiar with. If you full crimp everything, then maybe set yourself the challenge of indoors of open crimping everything and just see what it's like. If you open crimp everything, have a go at full crimping once you're really warmed up, and just see what that's like and get good at everything. Some people I know that have kind of minor arthritis in their joints and different things like that, or get lots and lots of niggles, lots of finger injuries, if they focus mostly on open-handed strength, then that really works for them. Whereas if you've not had niggles, or you don't, you know, have any difficulties with your joints, then yeah, I wouldn't worry about full crimping.
Lovely. And then I think Janina is the last question in the chat, and then most of it
cool.
is.
Yeah, so after a herniated disc, I'm trying to get back into the rhythm of my movements. However, despite good mobility, it is difficult for me to find my rhythm. Do you have a recommendation? So maybe, yeah, maybe that person finds it, yeah, hard to get into the flow, or maybe a bit stop-start, or a bit hesitating, potentially. So yeah, you could have a little go, you know, like I mentioned before, is having a go at some easy routes or easy circuits where you don't stop. And I don't mean rush. That doesn't mean snatching for things and rushing. It just means we're just gonna always have something moving, whether that's our hips or our feet or our arms. You're not grabbing a hold and stopping and then thinking about it and then grabbing another hold. You just always got to be moving, even if it's slow motion. So that could be good for getting into your flow and getting a bit of a rhythm. And sometimes if we focus on something else, we get our rhythm back. So sometimes if all we think about is, oh, I'm climbing really stop-start and I'm hesitating loads, that's all we think about, and then we do it more. Whereas sometimes if you take your mind off it, then actually things come back to you. So you could try just climbing a circuit with some headphones in and a nice beat or a nice song that you really like, and just see if it takes your brain out of you a bit more and gets you used to flowing a little bit more. Or having, yeah, something else that will completely take your mind off it. Yeah, I think maybe that's all for now, but then if they wanted to chat or gave me a bit more background, I might be able to come up with some more specific ways. That's maybe it.
Just a couple more questions towards the very bottom if you scroll down. I'm just going to put your email as well in the chat, so if anybody wants to contact.
Yeah, definitely happy for people to fire questions over. Great. Has the pandemic affected your head game at all over the past year? I found that anxiety was kind of increased massively for some reason. Yeah, it's really frustrating, isn't it? I think for me personally, it hasn't affected my head game, but I've also been living in the lakes where I have easy access to things, you know, so I'm very fortunate in that sense. And yeah, I think I kind of came back after the first lockdown with a lot of pent-up energy. So I was actually pretty psyched, but for sure, like a lot of people I've spoke to have definitely felt that kind of, that's just an underlying stress. I think we've all had this like underlying stress, like greater or lower for different people. So it's definitely there. And it's really frustrating and really hard. I think remembering that your brain's a muscle, and we definitely can make it stronger, and it will get stronger, and believe in that, you know, rather than thinking, oh, is this me now, you know. And like I mentioned before, if you feel like those sessions are becoming anxious and you're struggling to enjoy your climbing, or struggling to have good head game or whatever, certainly I think after your sessions, making yourself write down what you've done well and what you've improved at or developed is so important. Like, it sounds so simple, but when we write something down, we own it so much more than just kind of thinking it, and give yourself the credit for that. There was some other things I had in my brain. Yeah, sometimes when I talk, then I forget what the next thing I was going to say. There's something else. Yeah, I think I could maybe come back to that at the end. There might be something else that crops up. I had a few thoughts in my head and then I started talking about stuff. So I'll move on. I can maybe come back to that if anyone wants to stick online.
And then Marie's, I think, the final question, and everybody else is just saying nice things.
Do you have, yeah, it's fine. And if anyone needs to get away, then go for it. I'm not worried. Do you have some advice about warm-ups in the outdoors? Often we don't warm up properly. Yes, so true. I get really frustrated warming up because I just want to climb. So if you struggle to warm up, I think coming up with a little bit of a routine that works for you is really important. So I'd say like pulse raiser, we're all taught that in PE, but like something that's going to get your heart rate going and your breathing going. So that might have just been the walking, or it might be a case of doing some skipping at the crag or jogging or moving around or anything. Once I've raised my heart rate and my breathing, I'll then try and warm up the big muscle groups, okay, rather than the little muscle groups. So that'll be my legs and my arms and my back. So even something like flaking a rope out there and back, I find warms my shoulders up really well. I have some TheraBands and like exercise bands, and I find my back's quite stiff, so I'll do kind of wide movements, and moving those bands around works really well. For me, I do think I have to warm up quite a bit. Sometimes I'll just find a rock at an angle, or like, a rock that's sticking up, and I'll do some press ups off that. I'll maybe do some press ups, and then I'll do some pull ups, and then I'll do some press ups, and then I'll do some pull ups. But most of those I'm making easier. Okay, so I start easy and then I increase it. So my push ups, I'll start at an angle, and I'm just doing like gentle push ups. And my pull ups, my feet will be on the ground. And I'm just doing loads of pull ups. And then as I get warmer, I'll maybe have less weight on the ground, or I'll maybe start hanging and lowering and that type of thing. And then with the press ups, I'll sometimes, if I want to make them harder, I'll push off and actually release off the ground, so it's kind of faster. And then I'll be starting to warm up my smaller muscles. Okay, so I'll be starting to try and grip as hard as I can and kind of gradually increase that. It does vary. I find it very much depends on what you're doing outdoors. So if you're doing some bouldering or some route climbing that involves jugs and quite big holds straight away, then actually you don't need to warm up quite as much. Whereas if you're going to be jumping straight away on crimps, then for sure, taking the time to warm up your fingers is really important. Great.
Cool. And then Kat with a question at the bottom on a frozen shoulder, and then getting back to climbing with one properly mobile arm.
How to start to climb with only one arm properly mobile. This is going to be amazing for your balance and your footwork and your trust in your feet. So it's perfect. I think it's great. So definitely stick to kind of slabs and vertical at first, and see it as like, I don't know how frustrated you feel and everything, and it is frustrating, but trying to see it as a game and as a challenge. So can I get up this wall with just one arm? I sometimes will get people to climb with one arm. So incorporate stuff just with one arm, and what you'll find is you have to choose feet that aren't dependent on being able to pull. So actually you'll get really good at putting your feet directly underneath you and moving your hips really well over to your feet, because you can't just get away with yarding on your arms. So actually it'd be kind of cool for your technique, kind of good really. It's quite exciting. And in terms of being only able to climb with one arm properly mobile, hopefully I guess your shoulder will gradually come into it, and for sure take it easy. I think I would say rainbow feet and even rainbow hands is going to make a massive difference. So I would suggest for Kat, absolutely don't worry about the numbers and the grades, because it does not apply to someone with effectively one arm. Just try and get tons of mileage in, tons of fun, tons of movement on absolutely anything and everything. yeah, so mileage, fun, loads of movement, and then just gradually increase it. Cool. Someone's had to rush on to our next Zoom meeting. Wow. Great. Okay. Hopefully that's helped.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, send me direct emails or messages if anyone has them.
Fab, thank you. And yeah, it's always so great to have all of your questions because it makes this really interactive. And Esther's email is there in the chat, and I'll send that around with a follow-up email. I think this has just been such a fantastic talk, and actually for quite a lot of us, maybe not so much at the moment, you get bored of your home wall. You've done all the routes that are at your grade and you just don't really know how to, you kind of get into that training mode because you don't know how to make the best of it, or it's not interesting. And actually so many practical ideas there of how to really get the most of it. And as we go back, we're probably going to be sort of condensed and split up into not being too close to the next person. So you'll be stuck on one line for a bit. And so to really get the benefit out of that time will be awesome. Everybody, please tag us in your pictures of hands-off knee bars. You've been set a challenge there by Esther, and we really want to see them.
Oh, thanks so much, Esther. That was brilliant. In fact, you're now responsible for a burnt cake and a burnt pizza because people were so engrossed.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
So much, Fab.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
That was awesome. Thank you so much.